Hey, you. You're finally awake.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. We all know I love the Super Nintendo. We also know I love JRPGs, but there were plenty that never went outside Japan. So today I'm going to be looking at 10 Super Nintendo games that never left Japan, although they may have done so now, but at the time, you never saw a hint of them. As always, this is just a list of 10, it's not the definitive 10, so if there are ones I've missed, please let me know in the comments below. If you really think I deserve it, please hit that like button as well as the subscribe and notification bell to be let known when there's new videos coming out. We've also got a weekly podcast and also a $1 a month Patreon where you can find the link in the description below. Right, let's get into it, shall we? 10 Super Nintendo JRPGs that were only in Japan. Energy Breaker. Now this is considered a hidden gem of the Super Famicom library thanks to its polished presentation, the charming tone, and that unique mixture of strategy RPG mechanics with adventure-style structure. And if you know me long enough, I love these sort of games like Tactics Ogre, Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy Tactics, it's my jam. Now characters have an AP style stamina that determines actually how many actions they can take on their turn, which adds an extra strategic layer because usually everyone gets a turn and gets to be able to move and do something, not necessarily here. Interesting things here is the spells and abilities that are tied to the elemental energy that characters collect and they can build up, which allows for that deep customization. Now outside of battles, the game plays almost like a top-down action RPG where you freely move around towns, talk to NPCs, trigger story events and explore. And this is quite rare because you don't really do that in tactics games because, well, when you have those tactics grid systems, you don't really get to play in your own little field that you want to. And this itself is very rare because when you have a grid-based game, you don't get to explore, you just kind of stuck on grids, so I did like that. The story itself follows Maya, a young woman with a sarcastic streak who suffers from partial amnesia, because of course they do. She becomes wrapped up in a quest that initially seems quite small, and she finds out the answers about her past, but gradually it grows into a battle involving the lost civilizations, powerful energies, and a looming threat that can reshape the world. Like, it's got a light-hearted tone, it's a very character-driven story, with the cast having these good relationships and motivations throughout. And I love the art direction in here, it's got beautiful portraits and expressive characters, which really help build that narrative. It probably didn't leave Japan because, well, it was 1996 and the Super Nintendo was starting to die out internationally because we had the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, and they were dominating the RPG market. And also, tactical RPGs were very niche. Yes, we had games like Tactics Ogre and Fire Emblem, but they were really struggling to get any sort of localization at the time. And unfortunately, it lacked the global distribution power of something like Square or Nintendo, and when you haven't got a major Western partner trying to help you out, yeah, this game was unlikely to ever travel outside of Japan. And also with it being an RPG, there's a lot of dialogue that needs translating, and with it being a late era Super Nintendo game, probably people are like, nah, we ain't paying for a translator for that one. Which is a shame because it's a good game, it's got good visuals, and it's got good gameplay, and it's a tactical RPG. That should be enough. Tengai Makai Zero. Now, Tengai Makai Zero is a very ambitious and technologically advanced RPG ever released on the Super Famicom. It's part of the long-running Tengai Makai series, although you can recall it's the Far East of Eden series, and it blends Japanese mythology, satirical storytelling, and traditional turn-based RPG mechanics into a very, very Japanese experience. Now what truly sets it apart is the use of the real-time internal clock, the seasonal events, NPC schedules, features that were nearly unheard of in a console RPG at the time. Combined with a great presentation and enormous script, it stands as one of the Super Nintendo's most forward-thinking titles. Now at its heart, Tengai Makai Zero plays like a classic JRPG. There's turn-based battles, party-based combat, equipment, magic items, town exploration, and dungeon crawling. Pretty much the solid fundamentals, and it does it well. Now the main thing about this, and it's groundbreaking, is the real-time clock that continues even when the console is turned off. Now this affects NPC routines, the shop's opening hours, seasonal festivals, story events, and certain character interactions. This makes the world feel alive in a way very few games had ever achieved in 1995. And also the fact that the game tracks days, months, seasons, and even affects some of the festivals such as New Year celebrations, limited time quests, unique dialogue. That is very, very cool. Like, I thought Pokemon did it well back in the day with the bug catching competitions. No, this really did it. There's also relationship and choice-based progression, where player choices affect the character relationships, the dialogue path, and also certain story outcomes. And the presentation was really great as well. Again, there are better ones on this list, but for 1995 it was great. Now you play as Himiko, a young hero chosen to protect the land of Japan from demonic forces seeking to corrupt it. The setting is a fantastical version of feudal Japan, filled with demons, legendary heroes, and mythological beasts. However, this is Japan. It has a very satirical tone with epic states, absurd humour, and a parody of Japanese history and pop culture. Kinda reminds me of Mystical Ninja Goemon. But the story itself unfolds in chapters, with each region telling a semi-self-contained story while contributing to the larger conflict. There's a few reasons why this probably didn't leave Japan. Essentially, a lot of it's the culture. There are a lot of cultural jokes and mythological references that we're not going to go get in the West. Also, because of the battery-packed RTC chip, similar to games like Pokemon Gold and Silver, which just means you're going to have increased manufacturing costs, required special hardware supporting Western releases. And it's a big financial risk if you don't think it's going to sell in the West. And unfortunately, it probably wouldn't have sold well. I'm just being honest, I don't think it would have. Because we were still not used to these sort of things, and Western audience especially, if there were any sort of RPGs, wanted medieval fantasy, sci-fi RPGs, and simpler narratives, and this game was not it. Which is a shame, because it was truly groundbreaking with its real-time clock system, and I think it should have been given a go, but what do I know? Bahamut Lagoon. Now, I've talked about Bahamut Lagoon, praised it many times. Again, it's another tactical RPG. It has traditional JRPG storytelling, and you can raise a goddamn frickin' dragon. It's awesome. Now again, similar to other tactical RPGs, you don't just move one character, you have your own little army, and I like that. And you have a dragon, every unit has their own one to play with, and their relationship depends on what you feed it. So if you feed it good things, like, I don't know, weapons, food, anything, humans, poo, I don't know, it depends on what you do to them. This affects their morale, how they're going to be, their stat changes, and I like that, because also you have no control about what it's going to be. I've said this before, my dragon would be goddamn awesome, but it'd probably be fat like a Snorlax, because I'll be feeding it absolute crap, and I love that. Now what's cool compared to other tactical RPGs is that you can alter the battlefield with magic. So for example, the fire spells can burn away forests, ice can freeze the water, and lightning can destroy certain structures. And I don't think there's other tactical RPGs or many RPGs that do that sort of thing. The fact it came out in 1996 and Square knew what they were doing by this point meant the game looked absolutely fantastic. Now in this game you play as Bayu, the leader of the Dragon Squad who joins the princess and a band of rebels to reclaim their homeland. As part of the story, there's a good political conflict with empires, uprising and alliances. There's a tragic romance involving the princess, I'm not going into it because I don't want to spoil it, but there's some eccentric mages, stoic warriors and your dragons, with their own characters in their own right. And then again, like Energy Breaker, this was 1996, and this is when the N64 launched in the West, and Super Nintendo outside of that was kind of like, nah. It had a lot of the same problems. It's a tactical RPG, so not many people are going to look at it because it was very hard to get hold of. And Square itself was heavily pivoting towards Final Fantasy VII and Parasite Eve and other PlayStation projects, so they probably weren't going to be asked about a late Famicom title right now. Which is a shame, because I think we should get this. And the fact we've not had this re-released in some sort, just remake the bloody game. Everyone would buy it, I keep saying this, I would buy it. Everyone would. Dragon Quest VI. I could have talked about 5, because 5's really good, but I thought, why not talk about 6? Now this was released in 1995 for the Super Famicom, and it's a grand ambitious RPG that caps off the trilogy of 4, 5 and 6. There are big expansive worlds, a deep flexible class system, memorable characters, although not as compared to other ones, and a really good story about identity, dreams, and the boundary between what is real and unreal. Like, it has a dual world structure which is quite unique at the time, and I did like that, although someone's going to say, well, they had that in Zelda. I know they had that in Zelda. But here they had the real world and the dream world. So dungeons and towns and characters often exist in both worlds, but in different forms. And this means it can affect stuff like puzzles, layered exploration, and it has that sense of mystery and discovery constantly driving you forward. And you can definitely look at games like Link to the Past and Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger at this, for sure. Now, returning from Dragon Quest III, but it's been massively expanded, is the job system. And you can assign characters such as the warrior, the mage, the martial artist, thief, monster master, but also mastering multiple jobs unlocks new hybrid classes. You can have job change stats, spells, and equipment usage, and I loved it in Dragon Quest III, so to have it expanded here is even better. Now, although it wasn't as essential as it was in Dragon Quest V, you can recruit certain monsters such as slime, beasts, and unique rare enemies, but 5, it was a much bigger thing back then. There's loads of extra side content to keep you busy, such as hidden shrines, monster arenas, bonus dungeons, mini medley collecting, although I get fed up of mini medley collecting, but it's worth it because you get free shit, and that sort of stuff's really good. With it being 1995 and the last one on the Super Nintendo, Dragon Quest VI had some of the most detailed sprites in the series. It had some beautiful late-great Akira Toriyama monster designs, some smooth animation, and the music was top-notch as well. Now the story here actually begins with the hero's defeat by the Demon Lord Murdor, only to awaken thinking it was all a dream. But the dream has consequences, and the truth is far stranger than it actually seems. So as always, it's a hero with no memories, so he's got to reclaim his lost memories and unravel the connection between the two realities of the dream and the real world. You also have to gather companions who also have their dream self. And within the story there's an emotional and philosophical undertones, and there's the meaning of existence, which is a big one, but I like the idea of destiny versus self-made identity. Like, I don't believe in destiny personally. I believe what I get in my life is what I do with my own hands. I don't believe it's predetermined. Although some others would argue, no, there is a predetermined path for us all. And I'll let you argue that in the comments, and it's fine. I think the reason it didn't leave Japan was a lot of the problems I've mentioned before, but at a year earlier, the fact that RPGs just weren't big. And the fact that the PlayStation had already taken Japan by storm and the Super Nintendo outside Japan was kind of dying. And everyone had kind of gone, nah, we're not going to bother. Enix also had minimal Western presence. Yes, we had Dragon Warrior 1-4, but that was about it. They kind of all gone to Final Fantasy, and unfortunately, it just didn't really happen. And Dragon Quest just wasn't a thing until much later on in the genre. Remember I said the Energy Breaker script would have been big? This is massive. Dragon Quest has hundreds of NPCs, which means it's 2 worlds worth of complete of text. They weren't going to do that. The translators would have been at least set for generations if that was going to be the case. It just wasn't going to happen. Because people just kept thinking they want games like Final Fantasy VII, Wild Arms, and Super Mario 64, and to do a large 2D RPG, just not going to work, and they probably thought it wasn't going to sell, which is a shame. I know this game has been remade since, but it was an ambitious game for the Super Famicom, and I really think it should have had its chance. Fire Emblem Thracia 776. Now, this is regarded as one of the deepest and most challenging and most ambitious entries in the Fire Emblem series. Like, I swear to God, if you love your Fire Emblem games and you thought the original games were hard, who knew? This is considered the most difficult one out of all of them. It basically, this is hardcore. This is when the hardcore may as well come to the series. Like, characters here just can't be used endlessly, where previously, yeah, you can just use the same character over again for each turn. Here, they become fatigued and have to sit out, which means you've got to rotate your squads, and you've got to use under-leveled units where you're like, whoa, I'm not used to that, which basically means you'll be very, very thoughtful about every action that you do. But one of the best mechanics this game had, which I've never seen since, is units can capture their enemies and steal their equipment. And the player often depends on the captured weapons and the items and supplies you get are limited because it's war. And this makes thieves really important because they can actually steal the weapons from the other people, which, you never used to do, but imagine that. You steal some of the unit's weapons and they're absolutely useless, but you've just got their weapons. Now this kind of creates a scavenger-like dynamic, but I like that. Again, very different to any other game in the series. Now this story is actually set during the events of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, and focuses on Leif, the young Prince of Leonosta. Now if you've played Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, what a game that is, it's one of my favourite games of all time, it's kind of set during Part 2. So Part 2 is over this long period, and then essentially Leif comes during it having done the events in this game. Now, whereas the Genealogy of the Holy War goes into the mythical side and all that sorcery stuff, this doesn't really do that. This is about occupation, resistance, and oppression, so it's a very big desperate struggle against other humans. And it's very brutal. Like, you learn about the brutality of the Empire rule, the suffering of civilian, and the moral difficulty of starting a rebellion. And it's quite an easy one why this didn't leave Japan. Well, quite simply, because Genealogy of the Holy War didn't leave Japan. So as if this was going to leave Japan, no chance. And also, this came out in 1999 for the Super Famicom. And long after the Super Nintendo was dead everywhere else. Like, I'm even surprised this game got bloody made. Like, really, I'm really surprised this got made. Again, if we ever saw this, and I'm not surprised we've never seen it, I imagine they'll do Genealogy and this at the same time. I do think both of them need a re-release at some point, because my god, what a game series it could be. Treasure of Rudras. Now, this was released in 1996 and is one of Square's final and most experimental RPGs for the Super Famicom, and it's been often praised for its unique mantra magic system, which allows players to type their own spells, which I think that's hilarious because I'd just type in something inappropriate like fart. But obviously it's not going to use fart, but still I am very immature that I would use that. It had a clever multiple scenario structure that intertwines the three hero stories, and has some of the late best graphics for the Super Nintendo that Square have ever produced, and had a dark mythological setting inspired by Indian cosmology and doomsday themes. Now, the most famous feature of Rudras is the spell system. Yes, as I said, you can invent spells by typing syllables, which create magic with different spells. For example, you could type in IGNA, which is a fire spell, or Voltroa, which is a lightning area spell, or Curo, which is a healing spell. And by experimenting with combinations, players can discover hundreds of spell possibilities, so maybe the fart spell is in there. I'm going to say it's in there somewhere, I just need to practice with it so much. You have Scions, Rizza, and Solent scenario, so all have their own different way of playing the game, whereas Scion is a classic fantasy adventure, Rizza is a spiritual mystery-driven adventure, and Solent is about being puzzle-heavy, so very, very different, and three different ways of playing the game. You can play the three scenarios in any way you wish, and eventually they'll all converge into a fourth chapter. That's kinda like Live Alive, or Live Alive, however you want to pronounce it. Now, the combat is turn-based, but there are many modern features in here. So some of the enemies may change tactics based on the world's countdown clock, and some monsters evolve or mutate as time passes, which is pretty cool. Now, being a late era game as well, this game looked absolutely incredible for its time. Like, this is Square at its absolute best. Like, the sprites look amazing, there's beautiful spell effects. You'd be thinking this is a swan song, because after this we're off to the PlayStation to make games. The world of Rudras is bound by a cosmic cycle. This is very funky, this one. Every 4,000 years, a new race replaces the previous one, which is wiped out by a godlike being known as the Rudra. Now, humanity's time is about up, and all three of the characters face the world in different stories, finding out why this is happening, finding out what people are trying to do to extend the countdown, and how the gods are working against humanity or working against themselves. It's brilliant. Very, very dark story. And you can imagine why it probably didn't leave Japan. Again, we've mentioned it before, it's extremely late release. It has a huge script, so it's never going to get translated. And also, Square kind of had all their eggs in Final Fantasy VII. So, unfortunately, this was going to always get left behind. And also, finally, the themes were probably seen as too mature. Yes, we had some complex and mature themes in Final Fantasy 3/6, but here the apocalypse cycle based on religious cosmology, especially being Hindu-inspired, probably wasn't going to go over with the West, and they probably thought, nah, we're not into that sort of stuff, so they just never released that game. Which is a shame, because there's a chance here. I can't see why we don't get this remade. I think it would be an interesting game to remake, especially for the Nintendo Switch. Square, if you're listening, remake this please. Treasure Hunter G. Now, Treasure Hunter G is widely considered one of the most stylish and technically impressive RPGs on the Super Famicom. It was the final game Square ever released on the system, and it served as a showcase of everything the hardware could actually do. It had pre-rendered graphics, smooth animations, and an upbeat tone, and a memorable combat system that blended traditional JRPG elements with grid-based strategy. I hear grid-based strategy, I get very excited. Now, combat does take place on a grid, and like a strategy RPG, but every character has action points that determine how far they can move or how many actions they can take. They also have special skills unique to their combat roles, and a turn order based on agility, giving battles a fast, very snappy pace. The graphics in this game are great, and makes you think, are you even playing a 16-bit game anymore? The characters and monsters have smooth 3D-like animations, the backgrounds, because they're pre-rendered, are detailed and beautiful, and just the spell effects are awesome as well. Now, outside of combat, you can explore towns, dungeons, and forests from an isometric viewpoint, and this leads you to doing puzzles and also finding hidden passages, which is pretty cool, and again, has that exploration you like from an RPG. The story itself follows Red and Blue, not exactly the best names, two brothers raised by a travelling treasure hunter. After their father goes missing, the brothers set out an adventure that begins quite small scale to gradually a quest involving magical forces, ancient creatures, and a threat to the world itself. Now, what begins as like a light comedic tone early on definitely evolves to a growing sense of danger as the journey goes through, and go, maybe we need to stop dicking around, because this shit getting serious. And again, as I've earlier said, like other games on this list, this is released in 1996, and well after the Super Nintendo was already dead in Western markets because we've moved on to bigger, better consoles. And as earlier said as well, the script, it's an RPG, it's going to need a lot of doing. And although this was published by Square, the game was actually developed by Sting Entertainment, and Square's prioritised their internal teams and the PlayStation, and so basically, sorry Sting Entertainment, you just kinda got left in the dust. And as earlier said, tactical RPG was niche. So yeah, I know it's a lot of the same points, but what more do you want me to say? Star Ocean. Yes, Star Ocean! Many of you are probably thinking, hang on, isn't that a Dreamcast game? This is considered a very ambitious and technically impressive RPG that was made for the Super Famicom. It was developed by Tri-Ace, formed by the former Tales of Fantasia staff, and it pushed the hardware beyond normal limits with massive voice acting, advanced compression and gorgeous graphics, and actual real-time combat system. And it introduced many of the elements that would define the Star Ocean series, such as private actions, relationship mechanics, action-based battles, and space travel narrative blending that sci-fi and fantasy. It stands as one of the most impressive late-era 16-bit RPGs, and showing what the 16-bit Super Nintendo could do at its absolute peak. Like Tales of Fantasia, the battles take place in real time on a side-view battlefield. You directly control one character and the allies use AI, but you can give the orders what you want them to do. So you've got skills, special moves and spellcasting add that complexity which you want in an RPG. The combat itself felt fast, flashy and highly engaging, and again, Tales of Fantasia is awesome, so this is going to work, isn't it? Your characters can also learn skills as well as you go through the game and specialise into how you want them, whether it's purchasing skills like cooking or herbal medicine or combat training, or allocating your SP to improve each ability. This game also introduced the relationship system, which became a hallmark of the Star Ocean series. So when you enter a town, you can choose up to split the party. Each character explores separately, allowing special scenes, and your choices here impacts the friendships, the romance and the final ending variations, and also that gives the game replayability because you don't often see that in JRPGs. There's also item creation, another staple of the series which began, and you got cooking, blacksmithing, tool creation and alchemy. Item crafting actually helps your party dramatically, so yeah, don't overdo it. Now when I say voice acting, I'm not meaning like a full PlayStation 2 game or PlayStation 1 game, behave. There was a lot of battle cries, special attacks and cutscene dialogue to a point, but you gotta remember this was very compressed. Come on, that's what adds volume to these things, so you've gotta remember these things. And being a late-gen game, it had beautiful character portraits, highly detailed environments and smooth animations, and a really good soundtrack. It really did feel like it was a 32-bit game squeezed into a 16-bit system. The story begins on a peaceful planet, Ro-Oak. I don't know how you want to pronounce it, it's R-Oak. So you could say Ro-Ak, I don't know, you tell me how it's meant to go. Where three young heroes, Roderick, Millie and Dawn, set out to cure a mysterious petrification illness. And then of course this takes the sci-fi twist when the Federation arrived, so they turn up and basically the disease is actually a biological weapon, because of course it is. And it's actually an undeveloped world that you're in that was protected by UP3, which means Forbidden Contact. That's like Star Trek-y stuff. It's massively Star Trek. It's the Prime Directive all over again. If you don't know what it is, you need your Star Trek lore, it really is. To prevent the disease, the party have to go back 200 years, where you can basically learn about magic, the Felpool race, and interstellar history. Now, as earlier said, it's a very character-driven game with private actions that influences the relationships, the hidden characters' backstories, and the personal conflicts and bonds, which, as said earlier, can give multiple endings depending on what you choose. The overall narrative combines sci-fi military conflict, ancient fantasy civilizations, ethical dilemmas about intervention, biological warfare, and friendship and sacrifice, and that's quite a lot for a little game. Well, that's why it's so bloody big. That makes no sense, but it does in my head. Now, why did it leave Japan earlier? Well, let's be honest, the same reasons as before. But also, the huge cartridge and technical barriers. This was probably not going to be on the Super Nintendo because you'd have to compress everything, because this thing had a special chip, the SDD1 compression chip. So, I don't think they were going to do that because they probably think it's not going to work. Super Nintendo, it's RPGs, I don't think it's going to sell, so why are we going to spend all that money to put it on a Super Nintendo? So, yeah. That was probably the big reason, which is a shame because this is a foundation title, and I think if you love your JRPGs, especially if you love Star Ocean, the series, you should be giving this a go. Seiken Densetsu 3. Now this is regarded as one of the greatest Super Famicom RPGs ever made. It was a sequel to Secret of Mana and take everything that the series had loved, the 16-bit visuals, the real-time combat, the rich world building, and expanded it dramatically. This time you got 6 playable protagonists, branching narratives, multiple final bosses, and one of the most beautiful graphics engines on the Super Nintendo. It remains a late generation masterpiece that pushed the hardware to its limit. Now I know it has been re-released since, but at the time people were begging for it. You will select 3 protagonists out of the 6, and your starting party affects the main storyline, the key villains, the boss battles, the cutscene, the character relationship. That alone gives the game huge massive replay value, which again, you did not see back then. The combat happens in real time and improves dramatically over Secret of Mana, with smoother movement and hit detection, a more responsive attack system, stronger special abilities and tech meters, and AI settings to customize your party's behavior so they're not absolute dickheads like they were in Secret of Mana. Each character themselves has the ability to change class, and they've got a light and dark upgrade path, and multiple class branches, with different spells, stats, strengths and weaknesses. Again, this allows for huge customization. You can literally have the same party and play it several different ways, which is just insane. I just find that amazing. There's a day-night system which affects the enemy strength, the NPC behavior, and the magic power. God, this game's trying to think of absolutely everything. Now, the story itself revolves around the Tree of Mana, because of course it does, and as forces seek to revive the ancient god beasts and claim mana, 6 heroes, each with different tragedies and motivations, are drawn into the conflict that spans kingdoms, gods, and destinies. Now, I'm not going to go into each different combination, because I think that's what you need to do and go find out yourself. But either way, this is such a great game that everyone needs to experience at least once or 26 times to fully understand how good this game is. And we've gone through most of the reasons why these games don't appear, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But one problem was that Secret of Mana didn't sell too well. So it had been released overseas, but it didn't sell well, and Square were kind of uncertain if they were going to think, well, should we bother doing it again? And they probably went, nah, not worth the money, we're just going to leave it. Which is a shame, because this game is celebrated for its visuals and combat action, and eventually it was re-released and everyone was very, very happy. It's Trials of Mana. I have it, I have the remake, you should all give it a go, right now. And finally, Feda, the Emblem of Justice. Now, Feda is another tactical RPG, so of course we're going to finish on a tactical RPG, because I want to. It's remembered as one of the Super Famicom's most underrated tactical titles. I just see it as Nintendo's Shining Force. It looks like Shining Force. Like, everything about this game is Shining Force. It also has a permanent death system like Fire Emblem, so basically losing key units can alter your difficulty and strategy, and death reinforces the game's pretty grim tone. Teaches you mistakes carry long-term consequences. They didn't die in Shining Force, they went straight back to the back. Now, aside from all the usual stuff that comes with tactical RPG, there are branching paths and moral choices, and your decisions can change the story outcomes, affect alliances, and determine which characters survive or join. Again, that makes replay value. It has a very, very dark and distinct visual style, so it's not really having this bright sense of the world, it's muted colours, stark character portraits, and very somber battlefields. Again, this is war. The story follows Ein, a knight caught between a corrupt ruling power, rebellious factions with questionable motives, and his own sense of justice. Rather than having a clear good versus evil, the game's very ambiguous about actually what is the right path. And Feda itself deals with the cost of war, the corruption of power, religious extremism, and justice versus obedience. These are very uncommon for console RPGs at the time, and if you're going to look at anything, it's probably Final Fantasy Tactics, but that wasn't out at this point. And it's a very, very tragic story. Many characters suffer grim fates, are forced to make impossible choices, and are shaped by trauma rather than destiny. The reason why this probably didn't come out is that tactical RPGs, especially tactical RPGs, were extremely niche outside Japan, and Fire Emblem hadn't really been localized yet, so there wasn't much out there to try and satisfy people to want to play this game. As I mentioned earlier, this story is grim and very political, which may be a bit too much for some people. Also, there is obviously the heavy text and the complex story, which means you're going to get the translators in, which is not going to happen. Now, the game was developed by Max Entertainment and published by Yanoman, which meant they've not really got big footholds in the West, which means you ain't going to get the distribution, which means it ain't definitely happening. It's a shame because this game was respected for its tactical gameplay, the permanent death system, and the branching narrative, which you don't see in Fire Emblem, and a very, very mature and complex story. But because of that, it probably made the game too niche to come out in the West, which is a bit of a shame because why not learn about actually what happens in war? It's not all sunshine and roses. And that's it, 10 JRPGs that are stuck in the West. What do you think? Are the ones that I need to talk about? Let me know in the comments below. Until then, I'll see you all again for another video. My name's been Danny. Take care. Bye bye.